What's going on, everybody? John Pielli here with another edition of the Pass Ball Show. Today, I'm going to talk about the baseball's Athletics, a team that is getting set to move for the third time in the history of its franchise, and before it's all said and done, will be playing in Las Vegas. The Philadelphia Athletics remained there as an original American League team, which came in the league in 1901, stayed all the way through the 1954 season. From 1955 to 1967, the Athletics moved and played in Kansas City. From 1968 to 2024, the Athletics played in the great California city of Oakland. From the 2025 to the 2027 season, they'll be known just as the Athletics and will be playing in Sacramento. And you know that after in the 1928 and beyond season, they will be playing in Las Vegas. Now, only one other time in the history of professional sports has there been a team that has played in four distinct cities. You have to go to the NBA, and the team now known as the Atlanta Hawks started out as the Tri-City Blackhawks from 1949 to 1951, then moved to Milwaukee as the Milwaukee Hawks from 1951 to 1955, moved to St. Louis to be the St. Louis Hawks from 1955 to 1968, and since 1969 have been known as the Atlanta Hawks. Now, if you go back to understand the reasoning in baseball and eventually in basketball and football and hockey, you see some teams ending up moving around the country. The country as a whole is expanding in the 1900s. It starts out as 13 colonies a long time ago, and it eventually gains more territories and more area. And sports, just like people that get up and move, we want sports to kind of cover the entirety of the country and not just certain cities and certain areas. So baseball, really, by the end of the 1940s, was considering expansion, was considering even competing leagues, perhaps a Pacific Coast League or an international league that might come in and compete with the American and National Leagues that were existing at the time. So baseball decides, hey, it might be time to spread some of the teams that you got across the country. And in both the American and the National League, you have a lot of common cities. There were two Boston teams. There were two St. Louis teams. There were three New York teams. There were two Philadelphia teams. So before expansion, which comes in 1961 in the American League when they end up adding the California Angels, I think the Los Angeles Angels at the time, and the new Washington Senators franchise after the original one moved to Minnesota. And then in 1962, you get the Houston Astros and the New York Mets. Prior to that, you have relocation of what became 5 different franchises in Major League Baseball. The first one happened after the 1952 season. The Boston Braves moved from Boston to Milwaukee, where they would stay through the 1966 season. 1967 on, they've been in Atlanta as the Atlanta Braves. The St. Louis Browns, after the 1953 season, ended up moving to Baltimore, where they've been the Baltimore Orioles. After the 1954 season, the decision was made to move the Philadelphia Athletics to Kansas City. After the 1967 season, they moved from Kansas City to Oakland. And like I said before, in Oakland through 2024 and 2025 to 2027, they'll be in Sacramento. And then from 2028 on, they will be in Las Vegas. And then, of course, the big decision was made when both the Brooklyn Dodgers and the New York Giants moved 3,000 miles across the country to become the Los Angeles Dodgers and the San Francisco Giants. What 4 of these 5 changes to the game had in common was, in most cases, the best team, the team with the most dominant record, the team with the most World Series championships, ends up being the one to stay with the lesser of the teams moving. That happened with Boston. The Braves ended up going to Milwaukee instead of the Red Sox because the Red Sox at that time had won 5 World Series championships. The Cardinals ended up remaining instead of the Browns in St. Louis because the Cardinals had won 6 World Series championships and the Browns had won 0. Of course, the Yankees end up staying over both the Dodgers and the Giants because the Yankees at that time had won 17 World Series championships. The Giants had won 5 and the Dodgers had won 1. What doesn't fit in is the fact that the Philadelphia Athletics had won 5 World Series championships of their own, and the team that ended up remaining, the Philadelphia Phillies, had yet to win a World Series championship. Now, you can make a case, because of what I just said, that it really should have been the Kansas City Phillies, eventually the Oakland Phillies, eventually the Sacramento Phillies, eventually the Las Vegas Phillies. Would totally change history, right? You know, you think of the 1980 and 2008 World Series championship Philadelphia Phillies, you think of Mike Schmidt, you think of Robin Roberts, you think of Steve Carlton, you think of Richie Ashburn, you think of all the dominant Phillies that you would see after the year of 1954. Imagine if they were playing in different cities. Philadelphia was a very strong American League town, going back to the advent of the American League. You can make a case that the Philadelphia Athletics were one of the first dynasties that the American League had seen before the Boston Red Sox and before, of course, the likes of the New York Yankees. The Athletics were good. They won World Series championships in 1910, 1911, and 1913. Should have won or were favored to win in 1914, but lost in one of the most miracle upsets in the history of professional sports when the Boston Braves beat them. Now, Connie Mack, who was the manager and eventually the owner of that team, decided that he didn't want to pay his players. Maybe he couldn't afford it. Maybe it was something that he was unable to do. But what he ended up doing is selling off and trading a lot of the valuable players that helped him win those 3 World Series championships in 4 years. After that, they ended up having one of the worst teams in baseball history, with 117 losses in 1916. He built that team back up with great players like Jimmy Fox and Mickey Cochran and Lefty Grove and Al Simmons. And they won the World Series championship again in 1929 and then the next year in 1930. After they lost to the St. Louis Cardinals in the 1931 World Series, they ended up having another teardown. Connie Mack, responsible for that, traded all his top players. And the rest of the time that the Athletics were in Philadelphia, they passed the Washington Senators. They passed the St. Louis Browns and were predominantly the worst team in the American League. Now, kind of a shame for a team that had that valued history, that had won those 5 World Series championships, that had been to another 3. They won 8 pennants. Conversely, on the other side of Philadelphia, the Phillies made it to the World Series in 1915 and then again in 1950. Maybe the more recent World Series appearance of the Whiz Kids, the Philadelphia Phillies at that time, maybe was one of the reasons that the Phillies were saved and not moved to Kansas City instead of the Athletics. The other reason, I really truthfully believe, it was Connie Mack. Connie Mack had a strong hold on the game of baseball, was known as one of the nicer gentlemen to ever represent baseball, was a great ambassador to the game, but kind of got a little too much power. Stayed in the game to be a manager of the Philadelphia Athletics for 50 years, which was well into his 80s and was certainly past his time. Even if he had left his post as a Major League Manager just 10 years earlier, there's a good chance that the Phillies and not the Athletics would have moved to Kansas City. I want you to throw your opinion in there, drop it in the comments section below. When it comes to teams that moved, 4 to 5 cities, the winningest team ended up going. The Athletics ended up being the one to have to move to Kansas City. God bless you. And as always, I see you on the other side.
I'm not going to go in the past.